Hello, welcome everyone.
Hey.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the Tech23 Impact Circles. So wonderful to see so many faces on here that are joining us for what's sure to be a great conversation exploring feeding 10 billion people, Australia's future food industries. As is custom, I would first like to acknowledge both the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the Bunurong and Woiwurrung Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land where the Slattery's team meets, works and creates. We pay our respects to the elders both past, present and emerging. We also acknowledge that people are attending today from all over the place and other traditional lands and nations, and extend our respects to their custodians, ancestors, elders and future leaders. Always was, always will be. Lovely to see you here, Rachel.
Hello, Adina. Nice to see you too, and especially with the great news about Melbourne opening up. That's very exciting. I'm very excited also about today's conversation. The future of food is close to my heart, and I know to many on the line. I'm very delighted to welcome today's contributors. We've got a very full house. We've got Angeline, Michelle, Nick, Chris, Andrew, George, Sam, and Samantha, and we're in the safe hands of Phil, who will be leading today's discussion. I suggest you have a look on the Circles website to read their amazing biogs. And welcome to you all who are Zooming around the country. I think one of the things that is so fantastic about connecting on Zoom is the ability for us to reach people wherever they are. So please say hello, introduce yourself now on the chat, tell us where you are, where you're Zooming in from, and if you want to call the US election, please do so. I'm hoping today will be quite a good distraction from the US election for all of us. Tech23 is all about amplifying the people and the organisations chipping away at the challenges we face. Coming to you any which way, Tech23 will be shining a light on 23 young, innovative companies, and this is the 12th year that we've done so. We have the Amazon Conclave event happening next week for anyone that's interested in AI and ML as part of the festival, the Deep Tech Festival. And we also have a real in-person lunch happening on the 10th of December. We have more circles unfolding as we speak, and we've got the Matter investor briefings coming up. So we'll put some of that info in the chat and just check out the website to see what you'd like to attend. None of this could be possible, especially the circles, without the support of the Tech23 sponsors. So I just want to call them out: Oz Industry, UNSW, Main Sequence Ventures with the support of CSIRO, New South Wales Government, Macquarie University, Addison's, Ansto and Cicada. Thank you so much. Again, to everyone on the line, a warm welcome. Over to you, Adina.
Yes, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. You would have seen in your reminders and in the Zoom chat, there is a link to the Slattery's Community Charter, which is a great read if you need guidance on the behaviour that's encouraged at the circles. Now, just to confirm the running order today, we'll be starting with Phil and the contributors kicking off the conversation, followed by a lot of hearty audience Q&A, I'm sure, and then we'll finish with randomised deep dive breakout rooms. Now, we are using a shared mural visualisation board to capture your thoughts and squiggles that we'll share in the chat now. Please feel free to add whatever you like, and please do ask any questions that arise via the chat function in Zoom so we can pick them up later. Now, we will be recording this presentation and make it available post-event so you can revisit later on. As Rachel mentioned, we do extend our heartfelt gratitude to every one of the Circle contributors and all of the Tech23 contributors who've been helping today's session come into being. We want to thank you all for taking the time to share with us. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Phil to kick things off. Thanks, Phil.
Of course, I was muted. Hello, everyone. It's brilliant to see so many old friends and so many new friends in this circle, and we're going to have a brilliant session here today. I'm going to give a very, very brief framing, and then we're going to sort of start the eavesdropping into a bit of a conversation, and then hopefully we'll get you all involved as soon as possible. The big idea here is that over the next couple of decades, planet Earth needs to make twice as much food somehow. And the problem is we've run out of planet in which to do it. We're already creating 30% of the greenhouse gases from making food. We're already using 40% of the land. We're already using 70% of the fresh water. You know, of the mammals on the earth, 30% or more of those are humans, 70% or more are the mammals that we eat. There's only 4% left of other animals left on the earth. Most of the birds that are on the earth are chickens so that we can eat them and so that they can make eggs for us. And so, you know, I hope you can just see in those very high level numbers that we've kind of run out of room. We need to either make another planet or we need to make food and in a different way. And you know, that isn't a sort of a crisis statement from me. It's a challenge that I'm excited to be part of solving in my work as an investor at Main Sequence Ventures. And it's something that I strongly believe that science can solve. And I know most of you who are in this circle today will actually agree with that. But we need to have ambition. And if we have one failing in food production, it's that we can be terribly incremental, and we try and keep the wolves at bay, and we try and do what we can, and we try and sell a little bit more. And you know, I'm hoping that what we can all discover together today is something of a collective, you know, call to arms to do everything we can, be braver, and sort of build some new industries right here in Australia. CSIRO did a study last year on how big could the food industry be here in Australia. Currently, it's something like $180 billion a year. CSIRO thinks by the end of this decade, it'll be about 250 billion. So that's a big expansion. But even that, I think, is underbaking it, because it's assuming we make food in the same way. It's assuming that things like the growth in proteins is going to be driven by more vegans, and rather than food itself changing. And because food itself has changed, Australia, that already has this amazing reputation on Earth for creating food, can make a lot more of it than perhaps we've made before, and we can build some very significant industries here. Just to give you one example of that, if we use the Queensland sugarcane harvest each year to make milk instead of adding it to Coca-Cola and things like that, and we use fermentation technology to do that, we could actually double the world's milk supply from Queensland, right? And that's just to sort of provoke you all with this, you know, the simple scale of opportunity that we can all benefit from, including existing agriculture. This is not about Silicon Valley upstarts coming in and disrupting traditional agriculture. This is about what can we all do together with traditional techniques and technology. And we've got an amazing group of people here to get the conversation started. And I'm just going to give you just a couple of words on each. And if each of you could just wave so everyone knows who you are. So Angeline is with us from Simplot. There is Angeline. So Angeline is leading the Innovation and Growth Program at Simplot. Simplot, of course, is a massive food company which sort of spans the whole ecosystem from farm to fork. We've got the fabulous co-conspirator of mine, at least, George Peppou, on the call from VOW. VOW are inventing whole new animals and culturing the meat from those animals for our delights in the future, and he'll tell you all about that. Chris Liu, who is here with us from Horizons Ventures. Now, you know, I feel very proud that I've managed to get this guy out, because he doesn't come out and do talks. He's a very private person, so I've got him. So ask him questions. Chris is an investor at Li Ka-shing's venture fund, Horizons Ventures. They're arguably 10 years ahead of the rest of us in investing in this field. They're investors in Perfect Day and Impossible Foods and companies like that. A new food fund that's on the market right now and sort of showing the changes is led by Andrew Macintosh. Say hi, Andrew. Give us a wave. So Andrew's in Hong Kong, and the March Fund, where Andrew works, is is a collective of food industry experts that have decided that the way to really have impact here is to form a fund and make new companies. We have Michelle Colgrave, Michelle is leading a whole mission at CSIRO to actually help us to understand and invent whole new industries around protein. And of course, that's a massive trend that's happening right now. One of the companies making new protein is led by Nick Hazell from V2 Food. Nick's just sort of closed a very big venture round, is live in Coles as from today with his plant-based mints and burgers, also in Woolworths, also on Marley Spoon. Hi Rolf, how are you? and really taking the world by storm. We've got Samantha Wong from Blackbird, who has also been one of the early leaders in investing in next generation food companies. And finally, we have Sam Elsom, who is joining us from Sea Forest. And Sea Forest is one of this next generation of companies who are actually farming Asparagopsis, which is a kind of seaweed at scale in Tasmania. So we've got some amazing people here. And so I think, as promised, let's get the conversation started and allow people to eavesdrop. But please, the rest of you, just jump in, put your hand up, put a question, join the conversation if you want to. So, George, I'm going to pick on you because you normally say something provocative. Tell us what Vow's doing and the role that it's playing in this great opportunity in front of us.
Right. So we grow real meat from the stem cells of animals, which sounds pretty crazy. But we looked at that and we're like, wow, that's kind of crazy. How can we be weirder with it? So our fundamental thesis is that in order to change human behavior en masse, we can't replicate the meat that we eat today. We can't make beef, chicken, or pork. We have to make products that are objectively better than that. So when you're standing in that supermarket or sitting in that restaurant and deciding what you want to eat, you're choosing the more sustainable and more ethical product selfishly, not because it's sustainable and ethical. So the way that we do that is, or rather, when you bite into a piece of meat, you're biting into muscle tissue, which is mostly muscle fiber, a little bit of fat and connective tissue. We take the cells responsible for repairing those from an animal and store them and then can grow them back into those muscle fiber, fat and connective tissue. But we don't just grow the animals that we already eat. We're building a library of cells from all of these animals, which we know are delicious because there's historical records of how good they are, that we could never farm industrially. And ultimately creating these wide range of products that are more delicious, more nutritious, or better tasting. So that when you're standing in that supermarket 20 or 30 years from now, you're choosing those selfishly because you just want the best, most pleasurable food and you're not thinking about the sustainability or ethics around that product.
Great, thanks, George. And Angeline, is Simplot going to have a range of synthetically produced meat products in the next decade, do you think?
Oh, that's a really good question, Phil. I think, as a large global food and agriculture business, we have to be part of the solution, right? We already are part of the solution when you look at our portfolio of products. And certainly, yes. So it's about complementing, I guess, where is traditional food with new food and the way that we go about doing that. So it's definitely one of the big strategic directions that we're looking at. And we have to be quite purposeful in how we jump into this, right? Because we do have loved brands. We do make food for the mass, and how you get mass actually accepting some of these foods is also going to be an opportunity as well as a challenge.
And are you thinking in Simplot? Well, you are. How are you thinking in Simplot about the environmental impacts that I was talking? I mean, how is Simplot going to use half the planet when it's use half the land, if you like, use half the resources when it makes its food in the future?
Yeah, look, it's a real challenge, and I won't profess that we have all the answers, but they're live conversations in our business, right? So if we look at the headwinds of less water, less land, less energy. All of those things are certainly making us think differently about how we grow, what we plant, the areas that we look at that, and but also in the future, you know, how would we farm as well? So there's certainly very much live discussions. To say so, I think we're probably very much today very in the traditional space, but very mindful from our sustainability targets that we have. We've just launched our foresight sustainability goals. You can have a look at that. That's a global Simplot perspective. And again, really being quite proactive in how we start to approach some of this, but also mindful that we do have a very large business to run, right? So as most large corporates, some of these things take time.
Yeah. Great. And Samantha Wong, you know, I remember when we first started talking about food inside Main Sequence Ventures, a lot of my partners thought I was crazy, and this is like commodity stuff. You're never going to make money from food. Like, are we going to start selling sugar and flour? Like, what's the deal? Did you have similar conversations, and how did you convince the rest of them?
Identical, you know, confusion. Why are we talking about stuff that gets sold on a supermarket shelf? And I just think, well, firstly, like, well done on pulling this together, because 3 years ago, when you and I first started talking about it, and you and I, George, you could count on one hand the number of people who cared about building businesses in this space, and two fingers accounted for the people who were semi-interested in investing in this space. So it's really grown in leaps and bounds. I would say how the conversation has evolved is twofold. It's just such an enormous problem and such an enormous market, and it's global, and we're always attracted to that at Blackbird. We're attracted to doing good, not bad in the world, and eventually the Venn diagram does push you to look at things like food. And I think the second thing is, you know, in software products, which is sort of like where we started, we're constantly looking at engagement. You know, what's the daily active and monthly active? If someone is passionately in love with a product, they use it many times a day or every day. That is true of food too. If you can create a brand that people love, it is in their shopping list week on week. It has that part of their budget, and the lifetime value of that customer is greater than kind of any software product that I can think of. And so I think there are a lot of attractive things about it. And the exciting part was the enabling technologies were really becoming available to scale to that problem.
Yeah, it's exciting times. And in a minute, I'm going to go to Andrew and get his view on that. But Nick, just tell me about V2. You're coming after the meat industry. You're going to disrupt them and replace cows. Is that the plan? What are you doing?
No, we're trying to frame it in a different way. I mean, the 10 billion challenge is we need another meat industry, and it's not about destroying the meat industry. And we've been really clear about this, and particularly in the Australian context. You know, we export 75% of the meat we produce. So we really don't want to frame this up as a vegan sort of problem space where the job to be done is to destroy the meat industry. It's about sustainability, and there's sustainable meat, and quite a lot of it in Australia actually, and there's very unsustainable meat. But what no one's arguing about is it's just impossible to grow that amount of animal meat with the resources that are on the planet. So that is a given. So something has to happen that's much more efficient than animal meat. But framing the problem up in a different way, I think, has helped us, certainly in V2 Foods, because it means that we're going after things that will enable us to scale dramatically, things that take away the barrier to plant-based meat, which is obviously there's taste, it's got to taste fantastic, but cost is really, really important. So we've designed our solution, if you like, very, very purposefully to try and actually tackle the 10 billion people problem. So we can scale, and so we can be affordable to people who currently can't really afford meat.
Yeah. And is there a role, do you think, for traditional agriculture in what you're doing at V2 Food?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at Australia, we could be growing so much more legumes that can be converted into meat. You know, I do a lot of back of the envelope stuff, but it's got to be more than 5 times as much meat than we currently produce. We could produce if we made it from plants, and that's an enormous value for Australia. So, and I don't see any reason why we can't coexist with meat farming as well. In fact, that happens a lot in Australia. There's a lot of mixed systems, and they happen to be the best when it comes to sequestering carbon into the soil. And so this idea that Australia could actually be one of the main carbon sinks in the world, I find really intriguing. And what can we do in the food system? What can we do to encourage farmers to sequester carbon, for example, and pay them for it? I think is very much part of what it's about. You know, we can't just look at it as a sort of, yeah, we're a processor, that's the farm gate, forget what happens before the farm gate. That's one of the problems with the food system. And one of the reasons why we call V2 food is actually because we want to look at the system. How can we do something that might change the system and just nudge it towards something that's more sustainable? Because we know that the current system is, we've got really good people doing everything they want to do, but they're incentivized to do the wrong thing, even though they're good people trying to do the right thing. So somewhere in there, we need to change the system. Yeah, great. And Michelle, I might go to you and actually get your views on this, because you're looking very much across the whole system. And also I'm mindful we've got a lot of sort of alt meat type groups here. You know, you're looking more broadly at the opportunity in protein. What are you seeing at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And look, within the Future Protein Mission, which is really an ecosystem that we're developing for Australia to deliver on the promise of protein, delivering new protein industries for Australia, we incorporate both the plant protein that feeds into Nick's work. We're looking at the opportunities to enhance the animal and aquaculture systems. And we're also looking at those Horizon 3 industries like George's with BOW, and also things like insects and algae and these other areas that we really don't exploit now. So I guess it's about shifting the story from 75% of our calories coming from 12 plants and 5 animals to thinking about the biodiversity that exists on our planet and what science and technology innovation is needed to not just undertake incremental change, but transformational change. And how can that deliver benefits to Australia? So whether it's in the economics in producing these plant proteins in Australia from Australian grown legumes and delivering those benefits back to processors and producers, through to what are those new industries, like you talked about with the sugarcane, producing milk or producing other proteins that are highly valued. So there's a huge scope there.
You know, one of the investors working on the sugarcane plan 10 years ago, I guess, is Mr. Liu. Chris, you've told us the story many times of that disgusting first taste of Perfect Day that you tried. You know, tell us about what got Horizons there such a long time before the rest of us.
Thanks, Phil. That's a very interesting question that I was actually preparing to try to figure out just the sort of the right angle to kind of answer these types of questions. The thing about Horizons Ventures is that we are a technology investor, not a food investor. And so, started about 2013, 2014, we were looking into categories of trying to solve the world's problems. This includes too much carbon dioxide in the air, food systems is not working. And we were trying to identify what types of next generation platform-based technologies that people are sort of tweaking and fiddling with that could make a fundamental impact. And one of the things that we did discover was the onset of synthetic biology. And so, for majority of the companies that we invested in this particular space, this includes Impossible, this includes Perfect Day, have been in the synthetic biology space. And I believe most of the audience might be familiar with what synthetic biology is. It's essentially leveraging yeast. It's like brewing beer, leveraging yeast to do the work for you to produce either proteins or, as one of the new companies that Ring Sequence and us have invested in, is looking at producing fats, for example. So that's the particular angle. And that's actually when we met Pat Brown at Impossible, and also Ryan and Perumal at Perfect Day. And you are right. The first quote unquote milk that I tasted from Perfect Day was a clear liquid. sitting in a sports drinks bottle that they had just prototyped, and you know, the guys wanted us to just have a drink, and I thought I was going to die, to be honest, afterwards. But I had an inkling of this, especially in the back of your throat, the palate of milk protein. And we found that really, really interesting. And so here we are today, and they're doing quite well. They are in the process of, I think, also looking at Australia, of getting their ice creams in here. So if anyone's interested in partnering up with them to produce the ice cream, please let me know. Excellent.
Thanks, Chris. And Sam, your journey is an interesting one, because you, Sam, Elsom, you came out of fashion, right? And you were driven by environmental ideas, and Sea Forest kind of came out of that. To talk about what motivates you to do what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think largely driven by climate change, as you pointed out, Phil. We started Sea Forest largely to capture carbon through the farming of seaweed, and then through learning of the CSIRO's work actually with Asparagopsis, which is a native Australian seaweed, which fed in small quantities to livestock and drastically reduce, if not eliminate, methane, whilst also producing around a 20% increase in productivity. So we have this ability to not only combat climate change, but also produce more food with fewer resources, which is kind of a powerful proposition. You know, the challenges obviously were that no one was growing it. And so, you know, we've had to overcome those. And I think blind optimism is a wonderful thing when you take on these challenges. And so I think that's, and we've been, you know, really, we've had a tremendous amount of progress over the last 2 years, and are now the only company in the world commercially producing that seaweed. And I think the wonderful thing that presents is an opportunity for Australia and New Zealand beef and dairy farmers to have a differentiated product and a competitive advantage globally.
And there's not many places in the world, right? Like we can't just start growing Asparagopsis in, you know, off the coast of Brighton or, you know, in Vietnam somewhere, right?
No, you can't. And it's the very same reason that, you know, the seaweed industry globally is an $11 billion industry. In Australia, it's around $2 million industry. It's tiny. And that's largely because of the 12 main species of seaweed that are cultivated around the world. 9 of them are Northern Hemisphere endemic, and we're not allowed to grow them in Australia. And so finding uses for our native seaweeds is part of the challenge. But yet, one thing that's really interesting is that Australia is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet for seaweeds. We have more of the 14,000 recorded species of seaweed in Australia than anywhere else in the world. And so, you know, that in itself is a challenge. Another thing about seaweed, I'll try and keep it short, but is that it's highly regarded as a zero input crop. It doesn't require much, you know, habitable land. You know, it's unaffected by droughts, fires. You know, it doesn't require fertilizer in the way that land-based crops do. So there's a tremendous potential in seaweeds to help fix, you know, or address that feeding of 10 billion people.
And of course, it's not incremental at all, because it's a whole new industry, isn't it, around seaweed? And, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, the environmental impact of agriculture on the world, this sort of 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of that is from cattle, but the technology that's in Asparagopsis it's beautifully simple, but extremely powerful, isn't it? Can you just talk a little bit about what effect it would have on cows burping?
Yeah, so the way in which it works, it's a unique seaweed. It has these little gland cells, and within the gland cells, there's about 120 bioactive compounds. And these compounds react with the vitamin B12 enzyme in the rumen and inhibit the production of methane. And that very moment is when that which would have been created or expelled by the animal as a waste product is in fact converted into energy which the animal uses to grow, or produce more milk, if you like, per kilogram of feed. So that's sort of the power of the seaweed, but it's unique in the way that it has these gland cells and this complex chemistry. Yeah, so it's and it's native to Australia and New Zealand. I think that's really important too.
I mean, I think that is one of the really powerful ideas, that it's, you know, a lot of this stuff we're talking about is high tech, it's fermenting things, it's genetically modifying yeast and doing just extraordinary things through science, but this actually exists in nature, doesn't it? It's like it's there. It's like it's solved the problem already. So it's amazing.
Totally. I mean, it's not straightforward. It's, you know, there's been a hell of a lot of research and innovation that's been required to cultivate the seaweed. It's never been grown anywhere in the world, and that'll be the same, I guess, for the other, you know, 9,000 species of seaweed if we were to develop an industry. But it's all exciting, I think, Phil.
Yeah, I agree. And now, Andrew, you've come to March Fund. You've started this fund. I think you can see the global phenomena that's happening, that Samantha and I and Chris got there first, but that's okay. We'll let him have that one. But you know, we're all excited by the same thing. What's also, so it'd be good if you could talk about why for March Fund, and also what's also interesting is it's not easy starting a food company, right? There's so many things to think about. It's not the same as making a website or something like that, which is hard for different reasons. But you know, making a food company is hard, and March Fund knows that, and that's part of your thesis.
Yeah, Phil, that's correct. I think for us, you know, it's interesting you say it's harder than, say, a regular tech company where your distribution strategy, if you've invented a new app, you simply upload it to the App Store and there's your distribution taken care of, right? It's with a food company, you need to get the technology right, but then there's also the scaling and the distribution and all of these other aspects that are all potential stumbling blocks. So we look at any of our sort of prospective or portfolio companies through this lens of trying to understand, is the technology right? Is the technology going to be something, you know, to go back to what Nick was saying, something that reframes the question here? Doing a little bit more of what we've been doing won't get us to where we need to get to. So I think all of us share that view that some things need to change radically. In order to get to that radical change, yes, we need new technologies, but what our experience has been is that a lot of new food tech startups, they can reach the first and maybe the second round, but then they need a different range of expertise within their ecosystem, particularly around scaling, particularly around distribution. And that's sort of something, as an investor, that's sort of something, the value add that we bring to it. And it's very sort of similar. You know, I go back to what Chris was saying as well. You know, first and foremost, we consider ourselves to be technology investors, but to realize those technologies, to get them up there, requires a much greater ecosystem with a much deeper level of expertise across a range of different areas. So that's the way that, you know, we look at it. We're looking at very similar areas of what we've already touched on here in terms of alternate proteins, synthetic biology, enzymes, fermentation, things like that as well. So that's sort of been our approach, and what we're seeing is really, really encouraging in terms of some of the technologies that are emerging and some of the ways that they're continuing to progress. And you know, something like Vita Food is obviously sort of a standout classic case of that, of sort of ticking all the boxes and making really good traction.
Thanks, Andrew. And so I'm going to sort of direct this one at both Samantha and George, because you're both looking at Val from different perspectives, but this is a whole new category of food, right? And it may need different supply chains. You're going to need to educate the consumer base about what it is and how to think about it and what to cook it with. And how are you thinking about that? So Samantha, how did you get comfortable as an investor? George, how are you thinking of getting out of the gate?
Okay, so on the second part around educating the market, I think fortunately or unfortunately, these products, cultured meat products, and particularly, you know, ones where you're developing new cell lines and whole meats that, you know, people have never heard of are only going to become available in very small quantities in the beginning. And so we don't need to sell to millions of people from day one. In fact, we need to sell to a very small group of people. And hopefully we can be very selective about those small people and actually use that as part of the marketing strategy. And so that was actually very attractive, that there was a sort of product and market fit in the sense of how you could bring this product to market. It suits being brought to market in a small exclusive way. And then in terms of the supply chain, we could just see the movement in the market. You know, Vow is not the first clean meat company, and it's not trying to do what companies 5 or 7 years ago have started to do. And in that time, you've seen a lot of progress on cell culturing, media inputs, bioreactors, automations, and George is much better placed to tell you the detail of that than me, but we could just see it in the progress in the 12 months, you know, since investing to kind of have 5 or 6 cell lines banked to be, you know, driving down costs at the exponential rate they were. Is just, I mean, they're not inventing that all themselves, right? It's not possible. It's because the whole ecosystem and supply chain around them was developing.
Thanks, Samantha. And so, George, come on, give it to us. How are you thinking about it? $2,000 a kilo.
Quick question for everyone. Raise your hand if you've eaten something like pigeon or deer before. I certainly have. Raise your hand if you've cooked that in your home kitchen. But a couple of you, that's I'm impressed. That's more than usual. Most of us have our first experience of a new or exotic or highly differentiated food product in a fine dining restaurant where it's prepared exquisitely by a chef. And so for us, the group that we have to sell, the group we have to get excited, are some of the best chefs in the world. And for them, the thing which they're interested in is the ability to distinguish their menu and the dishes that they serve from their peers, so they can compete for your mind share and your ability to choose their restaurant over others. So if we get chefs excited about the quality of food and quality of the product, then they curate the experience for you and educate you on the possibilities. So when you're then purchasing that product later, you're doing it with an understanding of how it should look and how it should taste. So your first encounter isn't going to be when you pick it up off the shelf in the supermarket, throw it in a frying pan for 20 minutes, burn the crap out of it and think, wow, this really tastes like shoe leather. I can't believe that was so expensive. And that's a really important part of our strategy, which is why we have been working with people like Neil Perry to do these product demos, because they're some of the best people on the planet at taking and experimenting with food to curate these extraordinary food experiences for consumers. And that is how we're going to introduce it to you. And so food service for us is going to be a big, big channel, especially in the early days, as Sam said. We're not going to have huge volumes of this. But when you're purchasing it off the shelf in your supermarket and cooking it and preparing it for yourself, that is going to be far from your first exposure.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, what do you mean Neil Perry's already working with it? Because I keep getting told this is years away. This is like the quantum computing of food.
Right. If you Google Vow Neil Perry, you'll see some of the dishes he cooked up with us in August. We're at a point now where we're producing and have been producing volumes that we can start to test with and understand its food properties. We're working with cells which are about 10 microns across, so what is that, 100 to a millimeter. So we're talking about minuscule, absolutely minuscule little cells that we're working with. And so it was really, really important for us to, as quickly as possible, start to produce terrible food. Like, it's the clear milk equivalent of Chris, because as soon as you have a food product, you can start to incrementally improve on that and go from that really mediocre first experience to something which becomes passable, to something which becomes great, to something which is good enough to be in the best restaurants on the planet. And so that's why we really raced towards producing volume at whatever quality we could get to first. So that gave us a base to improve from.
Yeah. And I think that's certainly something I've learned. I thought you could just you just kind of make some meat stuff and then you can put it in a package and sell it. But that's not been your experience, I don't think.
Mm.
Maybe can I just add one more thing to sort of think about in terms of the non-incremental thinking around this? I think what I probably loved and still love the most about Val is that when you are designing meat from scratch at the cell line, media, etc. level, you are creating a proprietary product. And you know, that is the gold, right? Right now, everybody is commodity kind of in commodity creation. You know, you might have a slight preference for Ingham versus, I don't know, Macro. I actually can't name any other chicken brands, you know, for you, because it's chicken. It's just chicken. You know, when you're creating something from scratch, you know, there is brand and market power in that. And that is an opportunity that's available to us to create something that has no competition.
Well, it's also, you touch on an interesting point, and ironically, Phil, one of the advantages of being premium and expensive and differentiated is we can get to a scale where we can operate commercially with way less money than companies like Memphis Meats, which have gone and had to raise $200 million to start to build a plant to contemplate launching a first product, because they have to compete with chicken breast. And to compete with chicken breast, you have to be a few dollars a kilo and able to produce tons and tons a week to even contemplate being on the shelf. Yeah. If I can produce tortoise burgers, I can produce 3 of those a week and sell them at an extreme premium and start to have a commercially viable proposition in that.
And what really sort of changed my perspective on Val, I remember, George, was that you have quite a clear path to being price parity with premium meat in expensive restaurants, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, long term, the goal for us is to feed billions. And so I'm not going to be satisfied until we're down at the $2 or $3 a kilo for Wagyu beef or for lobster. So we're able to hit both the quality, but also very low cost, so that people are choosing no animal-based product, or only using animal-based product in very, very limited circumstances, and instead purchasing more sustainable products from us or from Nick.
Phil, I'd love to jump in here if I can, just for a moment. I think that this conversation has been really interesting in I think of food as kind of a combination of science and art in some respects. You know, what you do in the kitchen that's your creativity. And if you're like me, it's pretty average. I'm not a great artist, but, you know, others are, the Neil Perrys of the world. I think this offers the opportunity for us to think about, what does the future plate look like? You know, it was meat and 3 veg, you know, in my family. Now it's completely different. You know, I regularly cook up Nick's V2 mince in all different forms. My kids have no idea. But I think, you know, what does it look like in the future? Are we going to be 3D printing food in our own kitchens? Are we going to be, is our food going to be dictated by the nutritional status because of our exercise that we've done on that day? So it really creates an opportunity, not only with Val but in all of these areas, to just create things that don't exist now. So that's what I love about this.
I've got a perspective on that, because I think you're both right. But the fancy stuff I do in a restaurant, you know, if I'm doing a Wednesday night cook, I can cook pretty well, but I'm not going to do anything fancy. I just go to the stuff that my mum used to cook me and my grandmum used to cook her, and that's the stuff I cook. And I reckon that just as we got some genetic sort of programming to love meat, you know, that was a survival thing, you know, 20,000 years ago. I reckon we got some genes in there that tell us, whatever you do, eat the same food as your parents, because that's not going to kill you. I reckon there's something in there that is an inherent conservatism about food. And if we're going to go for quantity, like real quantity, just do things like mince, you know, or whatever it is. And if it's in China, you got to do pork, and it's got to work in the things that people love to eat. When I was in Master Foods, I was R&D director for Master Foods, and I used to tear your hair out because you could never get Australians to change what they ate. And at a certain moment, you know, design thinking would sort of have you do what consumers do, you know, follow what they do and what they want and what they actually do, rather than what they say they do. Because if you talk to them, they'll say, well, yes, no, I'm gonna cook a Chateaubriand on a Wednesday night. And it's like, no, you won't. So yeah, we're keeping it really simple in that sense.
I want to be able to make that mince with the nutritional profile of a salmon fillet and the micronutrient density of beef liver. So you get the best of both worlds. You've got your Tuesday night spag bowl, but it's the healthiest spag bowl that you could possibly contemplate.
That's true. But it's got to taste like a spag bowl and cook in the same way, because you're not going to learn new skills.
But we need to be able to make it drastically better than just growing more cows or replicating the experience of low quality cows.
Yeah. And Nick's right. because in Australia, 80% of us are laggers. We don't adopt things very quickly. We're sitting behind the rest of the world in our adoption of novel foods. But if you look to other markets like Asia, where there's 80% adopters, I think there's some differentiators there. So
I'd be delighted if we had 20% of Australians trying any of our products. That would be a great outcome to see that in my investing lifetime.
I think one of the key things that the common theme here is that regardless of whatever technology it is coming, it is the food's got to taste good. And so if you look at the topic of this session, is about feeding 10 billion people. I mean, technically, you could theoretically produce a bunch of protein powders and really feed 10 billion or 20 billion people. But if it's not a delightful experience, I don't think us as humans would really buy into it. And so, taste, and some of the conversations I've had with George is very much around the fact that Val is a food company, it is not a technology company, and it is not a meat company or a culture meat company. Right? Its focus is you got to focus on the experience, however we do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to sort of talk about this food system question again that sort of Nick brought up. Like, who are the people in the world that actually ask that question? Like, I think, Michelle, you're asking that question somewhat now. The rest of us are all in our own little parts of the universe. But so, for example, if we gobble up all the soy to make plant-based meat, what are the cows going to eat? How we sort of think about, they're going to start eating
seaweed, I thought.
Protein, a seaweed, or protein made out of CO2 that Solar Foods are making, or how are we moving things around so that everyone wins?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, right? So, sorry, Nico.
The Lancet report sort of did the planetary boundary thing. That was the best crack at trying to figure out what is sustainable food for the planet. But I mean, the quanta of food that has to go direct to us and not via animals, because that's so inefficient. I mean, that's what has to happen. I don't think we should be worried too much about cows are up in arms because they don't get their soy, because there's plenty of things that cows can eat. But the point is if soy goes into a cow and you eat the meat, or soy goes into a V2 and you eat the meat, it's sort of like 30 or 40 times more efficient.
Yeah,
if we do it directly. So it's sort of, when we're short of land to grow food, then do that, because that's going to be more efficient.
And if we look at the Lancet report and the planetary dietary modelling, there's a number of solutions. And, it was around the tech innovations that we need. Sure, that's one. It's around the dietary change and the models for how we shift those diets. But it was also about how we repurpose waste. So we've got different waste at different levels. So we've got the waste that we're wasting in developed countries at the consumer end, but then we've got the produce loss. So if we can do a better job in dealing with some of that waste, because the reality is consumer behavior, like Nick said before, is one of the hardest things to change. But if we can do a better job of dealing with waste and convert that waste through insects into animal feed, then we've solved some of those problems.
Indeed. And Angeline, I think you were trying to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in there and just say, look, it's a balance, I think, in the food system, right? I think we can't have one or the other. And what heartens me is listening to all of this is how everybody's actually trying to solve for their bit of the system. And I wonder if, if there was more collaboration that happened, which would allow us to really actually support the entire food system at the end of the day. I think that would be a much more higher level that we could, as a community of foodies or whatever you want to call us, right? Because we're all trying to solve for this, and how do we feed 10 billion people at the end of the day? Even from our business, we say we contribute to feeding the world by respecting Earth's resources. So the way we're leaning into this also is, as a large food company, is equally as important as George with his, lovely meats. And George, I am definitely going to be one of those consumers for you. But we do know, and I think back to Nick's point as well, is consumers are are really fickle. It's about familiar difference. So, you know, an average consumer, I think ages ago when we did some global work, you know, would probably have a repertoire of 14 recipes that they keep churning out, right? So how do you get them actually really excited and energized about that? I think is also going to be. So I can see it's certainly straddling the premium, and I can see it straddling mass. It's just where and how we all play together in this space and help each other out, I think, as we progress.
Thanks, Angeline. I saw Rolf vehemently nodding then on the set. How do we get over those same 13 recipes? I wonder.
I know, I'm still trying.
Okay. Rolf, just for those of you that don't know, is the founder of Marley Spoon, so he's solving that problem for us. Look, I think this is a good moment to actually jump into some breakout rooms, Rachel and Adina. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. That could be great. I suppose if there's anyone, there's been quite a number of questions on the chat, but I know some of them are quite specific. So we might do that if everyone's okay with that. Did anyone want to share anything before we do that? No? Okay, so how this works, we're about to go into discussion groups. What we suggest is it's very random. I want to thank everyone that's actually contributed and everyone that's eavesdropped on the conversation, Phil. What we're going to do is we'll go into the groups, introduce yourself, self-organize as you would at a face-to-face event, share your takeaways, your questions, your challenges, have those random conversations that are so rewarding. And anytime you get lost or you want to come back to the main room and find a different room or whatever, just follow the prompts and you can do that. So I'll see you back here maybe a bit later. We can wrap and get ready to have a scotch as we face the American election sort of, you know, mess. Thank you everyone for joining in, and see you in a room in a moment.